Well, we've reached week 7 of the power rankings in the 2025-26 OHL regular season, and there's been quite a few news items that have developed since Friday. So stay tuned for a news video to be dropped later this afternoon. But in the meantime, let's count down the power rankings, starting at number 20, where it's the Erie Otters. No change from last week. Erie, though, had a great start on their road trip through the West Division. It was up in Sault Ste. Marie last Wednesday. They won that game on the road by a score of 5-2, and then faded as the week went on. Losses back to back against Saginaw and Flint. So for Brett Hammond, though, he really stood out for the Erie Otters against the Greyhounds, posting 2 goals and now has 7 on the season. So there's a bright spot for the Otters going forward. This week, they're home to the Guelph Storm Thursday. Saturday, they're in Barrie, and then Sunday in Owen Sound. So the Erie Otters continuing to put in the miles on the road. At 19, the Sarnia Sting. They're down 5 positions this week, and how the Sting played in the rivalry week against the Windsor Spitfires, I was expecting a little more from Sarnia, but they ended up losing both games at home against Brantford and London. They're both very good opponents right now in the OHL, but they were outscored 6-1 in those 2 games. The offense just dried right up. Ben Pickle, though, he scored the lone goal for Sarnia in those two games, so Pickle continuing to fit in quite nicely with the Sarnia Sting team as they try and turn things around. They're on the road this weekend. They're going to be in Owen Sound Wednesday. Thursday, they're in Barrie. And then on Sunday, they visit the Guelph Storm. At 18, I have the Oshawa Generals. They're down 2 positions this week. Not an easy week for the Generals. They had to play a home-and-home series against the Brantford Bulldogs, and they went 0-2, and they were outscored 7-2 in those 2 games. Despite the team's struggles, though, Owen Griffin, he scored both goals for the Generals last week. He now has 4 goals over his last 3 games, so Griffin continuing to show that offensive talent. This week, they're home to the Sioux Greyhounds on Saturday, and then Sunday, they're home to the Ottawa 67s. At 17, I have the Sudbury Wolves. They're up 2 positions this week, and it was a really good week for Sudbury. They posted wins over Barrie and Peterborough, and they now have 3 wins over their last 4 games. They're still at the bottom of the Eastern Conference standings, but with this offense starting to come to life, including 8 goals that they put up against the Petes, things looking a little more optimistic with the Sudbury team. And Kieran Walton, what a game he had against Peterborough. 5-point effort that night. So we'll see if they can continue the momentum this week. They're home to the Greyhounds on Wednesday, and then they travel to Kitchener on Friday, and then Owen Sound on Saturday. So some pretty tough competition coming up here for Sudbury. At 16, the Peterborough Petes, they're up 1 position this week. The Northern Ontario road trip is never easy for any opponents, and for Peterborough, they earned 3 out of a possible 6 points last week. That includes an overtime win in Sault Ste. Marie where Matthew Soto was the hero. Speaking of Soto, he now has 7 goals this season. He's fit in quite nicely with Peterborough. Now, the trip did end on an ugly note in Sudbury. They lost 8-2 to the Wolves, so we'll see how this team moves forward from here. They play the London Knights at home on Thursday before hosting the Kingston Frontenacs on Saturday. At 15, I have the Barrie Colts. No change from last week. For Barrie, though, in all honesty, I had them down to 18th after they lost in Sudbury Friday night. That extended their losing streak to 6 games at that point. But then they came back and won in overtime against the Kitchener Rangers. Cole Baudouin was the hero in that one. So 5-on-5, this team can compete with the best teams in the league. It's the penalty kill that continues to struggle for the Barrie Colts. It's 20th overall at 66.7%. So that's a glaring area for this Colts team to improve. And we saw them give up 3 power play goals against Sudbury and then another 2 against the Kitchener Rangers. So if this team can play 5-on-5, stay disciplined, they should be able to compete night in, night out. But as soon as that penalty kill gets on the ice, they haven't been able to figure it out to start this regular season. Although Eamon Edgar, what a week he had. He scored his first career OHL goal on the road in Sudbury and followed it up with another goal at home against the Kitchener Rangers. So great job by Edgar. This week, the Barrie Colts, they're in Brantford Wednesday. That's not going to be easy. But then they're home to Sarnia Thursday and home to Erie on Saturday. At 14, the North Bay Battalion, they're down 1 position this week. For North Bay, they opened with a 5-4 win in overtime against the Peterborough Petes and were first place in the Central Division as a result. Then they followed it up with losses on the road against Brampton and Kitchener. Now they're 5 points out of first as the Ice Dogs hold that top spot. Although this is a younger team, they're going to have growing pains during the regular season, but it was good to see Parker Vaughan get his first goal of the season, and that was the overtime winner against Peterborough. Now, this week for the Battalion, they're home to the Greyhounds on Thursday, and then Sunday they're home to Niagara. At 13, the Brampton Steelheads, they dropped 3 positions this week. After getting off to a hot start this season, the Steelheads look like they're cooling off now. 1-2 is their record last week. Both of those losses coming against the Niagara Ice Dogs. But it was a decent week for Kieran Wachowski. A goal and an assist in the 2-1 win over North Bay. And he put up another goal in the opening night game against Niagara. So Wachowski looking all right now for Brampton. This week, they're on the road in Ottawa Wednesday. Friday, they will be in Niagara. A lot of games early on in the season between Niagara and Brampton. And then Saturday, they host the Kitchener Rangers. At 12, I have the Saginaw Spirit, who are up 6 positions. They're the biggest climber this week. I actually did a double take when I put the power rankings together when I saw Saginaw at the 12 spot, because a week ago, Saginaw was on a 5-game losing streak. But after that, now they've put up 3 wins in a row, and those wins against Erie, Owen Sound, and Windsor. The Attack and Spitfires, 2 teams battling at the top of the Western Conference standings. So the Spirit bouncing back in a big way. The win over the Spitfires was in a shootout, though, so I kind of count those as ties, but still very impressed with their turnaround. And then Dimian Zhilkin had a hat trick in the game against the Windsor Spitfires. So we'll see if they can continue this. Thursday, they're home to the Flint Firebirds. Friday, they're home to Windsor, so a rematch. And then Sunday, they're home to Brantford. At 11, I have the Sault Greyhounds. They fell 4 positions this week. Not a great week for Sault Ste. Marie. 0-1-1 was their record last week. Those losses coming against Erie and Peterborough, teams much lower than them in the power rankings. Brady Martin, he has returned to the Sioux. He played in the game against Peterborough. So this is a boost for this organization going into this season after that great experience with the Nashville Predators. So we'll see how the Greyhounds respond here. He did get an assist in the overtime loss against the Petes. So it's going to take him, I think, a few games to get back into the swing of things with the Greyhounds. But I feel as though the Sioux are in a good position. This week, they're on the road for 3. It starts Wednesday in Sudbury. Thursday, they're in North Bay. And then Saturday, they visit the Oshawa Generals. At 10, I have the Flint Firebirds. They're up 2 positions. The Firebirds, they've been climbing the power rankings quite steadily these last few weeks, and they've been on a pretty impressive run. 2-1 was their record last week. They started the week with a loss in Kitchener, but then they shut out the Erie Otters, where Mason Corville earned his first career OHL shutout, and then they put away the Owen Sound Attack 6-2. The Firebirds getting the job done. They're now 6-3-1 over their last 10 games, so not too shabby there, and we'll see if they can continue this momentum. On Thursday night, they will be visiting the Saginaw Spirit. Saturday, they're home to Brantford, and then Sunday, they're in Windsor. So some tough competition up ahead, but we'll see what this Firebirds team is all about. At number 9, the Ottawa 67s, no change from last week. Not the greatest of road trips for them either. 0-2-1 was their record. Cooper Foster, though, he's putting up the points still. A goal, 2 assists, 3 points over his last 2 games. But the 67s, of course, were shut out in that first game in Windsor. And it was a bit of a chess match there between Windsor and Ottawa. And the Spitfires ended up on top in that one. Now, this week for Ottawa, they're home to Brampton on Wednesday. Friday, they're home to London. And then Sunday, they travel to Oshawa. At number 8, the Niagara Ice Dogs. They're up 3 positions. The Ice Dogs, a perfect 3-0 last week. Wins over Brampton and Kingston. And they're now riding a 4-game winning streak, so not too bad here for the Ice Dogs. For Niagara, they've also taken over top spot in the Central Division. They now have a 5-point lead over North Bay, so not too bad there. This is also the highest I've had Niagara in the power rankings so far this season. I know it's just week 7, but still, Niagara seems to be building some momentum right now, and we'll see if they'll continue this charge going into the next few weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if Niagara ends up being top 5 relatively soon if they can continue this play. But this week, they're home to Brampton, so that rivalry continues. And then Sunday, they visit the North Bay Battalion, so some big Central Division matchups ahead for Niagara. At 7, the Owen Sound Attack. They dropped 2 positions this week, and for Owen Sound, facing a little adversity right now, they open the week with a 4-3 loss in a shootout against Windsor. and then back-to-back losses in Flint and Saginaw. This is the first three-game losing streak of the season for Owen Sound, and they've also fallen out of first place now in the Midwest Division. They're 1 point back of Kitchener, so they're still in the thick of it. But we're not used to seeing a string of losses here for the Owen Sound attack this season. It's a little different from what we saw at the start of the regular season. Now, coming up this week, they're home to Sarnia on Wednesday. Saturday, they host Sudbury. And then on Sunday, they're home to Erie. At 6, the Kingston Frontenacs, no change from last week. The Frontenacs, they were on the road for 2 games last week. They lost both in Guelph and Niagara. A bright spot, though, for the Fronts was the play of Thomas Pobazal. He had a goal and 2 assists in those 2 games, so not too bad for him, as this Frontenacs team still near the top of the Eastern Conference standings. This week, they'll make the trip to Peterborough on Saturday, and then they're home to London on Sunday. At 5, the Guelph Storm. They're up 3 positions this week. Now, having the Storm this high may be a little bit of a surprise, but they've been playing some good hockey of late. They earned wins last week over Kingston and Ottawa, and they've extended their winning streak to 3 games, and they have points in 7 of their last 10 games. So they're getting the points right now, which is a good sign for Guelph. And Jaco Wysick, what an impressive start for his season. Last week, a goal and 3 assists, 4 points in those 2 wins against the Fronts and the 67s. He's now at 13 points in 13 games, so a point per game for the rookie. And like I said, not too bad of a start here for Wysick. This week, the Storm are in Erie on Thursday before they host the Sarnia Sting on Sunday. At number 4, it's the Kitchener Rangers. They dropped 1 position this week. For Kitchener, 2-0-1 was their record. They had wins on home ice against Flint and North Bay, but fell short in Barrie in overtime. This team, despite that loss in Barrie, they're playing some pretty good hockey right now. They're still missing key pieces in Vermeulen and Alanis, who've been out due to injury. They haven't played a game yet this season, so expect those 2 to return shortly. It sounds like they're starting to practice with the team a little bit more, and that'll add more depth to the offense for this Kitchener Rangers team. And we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out still as they wait to find out who's going to be hosting the Memorial Cup in 2027, because like we talked about in that interview with Mike Farwell last week, that's going to be a big decision on what direction Kitchener goes for this season. So we should find that out before the end of next month. Now, this week for Kitchener, they're home to Sudbury on Friday before traveling to Brampton on Saturday. At number 3, the Windsor Spitfires up 1 position. Windsor opened the week with a 2-0 win on home ice against the Ottawa 67s. That felt like a defensive chess match because the second goal of the game was an empty netter in the dying seconds of the hockey game. But then they also needed a shootout for their next 2 games. They had the win over Owen Sound and then the loss to Saginaw, but still 5 out of possible 6 points. So that's pretty good for the Spitfires here. They now have a 6-point advantage over Kitchener at the top of the Western Conference standings. But it's just those recent wins have not been in convincing fashion. They've needed either overtime or they've been close contests. So for the Windsor Spitfires, kind of expecting a little more with the talent on this team. I know there's been suspensions, there's been injuries, so they haven't had a full lineup, but still, expect a little more here from Windsor. This week, the Spitfires will be in Saginaw Saturday, and then Sunday they host Flint. At number 2, the London Knights, no change from last week. They picked up another 2 wins. Overtime win over Ottawa, where Ben Wilmot was the hero, and then they shut out the Sarnia Sting 3-0 on the road. Sebastian Gatto getting his first career OHL shutout. The Knights, they're now on a 9-game point streak, and they find themselves just 3 points back at Kitchener for first in the Midwest Division. This week for London, they're making the tour through Eastern Ontario. It starts Thursday in Peterborough. Friday, they're in Ottawa, and then Sunday, they will be in Kingston. So at number 1, the Brantford Bulldogs. No change from last week. In fact, this is now 6 weeks in a row I've had Brantford at the number 1 spot in the power rankings. 3-0 was their record last week. Wins on the road against Sarnia, and then they swept the home-and-home series with the Oshawa Generals. This team has still not suffered a regulation loss. So in 13 games, they've earned at least a point. More so victories. So the Brantford Bulldogs getting the job done, especially with all those weapons up front. And we'll see how long this streak can continue. Wednesday, they're home to the Barrie Colts, and then they go on the road through Michigan. Saturday, Flint, and Sunday, they're in Saginaw. So that's the power rankings for this week. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on your team. Where do you expect them to go with the schedule ahead? Love the interactions. Thank you very much for all your support. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Talk to you again soon.